So, yeah, is it on? Hi, good afternoon, young leaders or future leaders. My name is Maris Cepurītis. I'm a researcher at the Center for East European Policy Studies that is based here in Riga, Latvia. I also work as a lecturer in university, and I'm a member of board at Latvian Transatlantic Organization, one of the organizers of this event. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the second panel of Future Leaders Forum 2016 that will focus on weaponization of information in modern conflicts. So if you look at information and conflicts, then information has been a part of human interaction, and one side of human interaction also is a conflictual side. So since ancient times, we have seen that information have been part of this conflict, also military conflict aspect. If you look at ancient Greece, it is said that Alexander the Great used information in order to create an image that gods, for example, were on his side during his campaigns, and it was in order to secure or mobilize the societies that stayed back in Greece, and also in somehow to scare his enemies. Also, during ancient Rome, we have heard quite a lot that Rome was a civilization, and countries or tribes living near Roman borders were barbarians. This is also some sort of information how it was used in order partly to legitimize military aspiration. And it continues. It continued for centuries, and now we have come up to 21st century. And for last 2 years, especially since annexation of Crimea and other actions in east of Ukraine, the term or the concept and different wording of usage of information warfare, hybrid threats, also in connection with cyber threats, have been present in Western discourse, in discourse of NATO, in discourse of EU. So this panel will, let's say, tackle these issues on what is the role of information in contemporary conflicts. We have 3 experts in this panel, and starting from closest to me, first Jan Sārts. He's currently heading NATO Center of Excellence for Strategic Communications. Previously, he has been for quite a long time also in Latvian Ministry of Defense, and also been integrated not only in issues of strategic communications, but also on cyber defense and other defense-related issues. Next, we have Mr. Giles Portman, who is currently heading EU Stratcom East, that is part of External Action Service of European Union. Previously has been also a diplomat from in EU, also in British Foreign Office, so also quite a lot of experience. And last but not least, we have Stanislav Hilčuks, who is a representative from the business perspective, because if you have analyzed the military history, then interaction between private and also military has been quite a lot present, and also in this information space, there is a lot of interaction and quite a lot what also business can learn from military, and what business can and what military can learn from business side. So we will also draw on Mr. Hilčuk's expertise. I will like to have this panel as a 3-course meal. We will start with the starter. I will ask one question for all of the speakers, and looking for a short answer. Then I will ask a question that will draw on your expertise on these issues. That will be the main course, and for dessert we will have your questions. So my first question for all of you would be, if information has been a like factor or element in conflicts for thousands of years, and so what is the new thing that you can draw on? What are the new tendencies that you see that forces us to look more closely at the aspect of information in these contemporary conflicts? Let's start with you, Mr.
Well, first of all, of course, information as a part of conflict and a part of warfare has always been there. The reason why it's there because that makes people change their behaviors. And that's, if we think about the conflict, what the conflict is all about. In a nutshell, it's about changing the behavior of the other party in the way you want him to, or them to behave. And that is still there. Humans are still there, still the same instincts, basically the same motivation patterns. These are the things that are still valid for today as it was thousands of years ago. The difference, though, is that our understanding of human has significantly increased. Our ability to understand human interaction is at a different scale than it used to be. Another element that is different is the factor of globalization. We speak of globalization of the economy, but basically we are also seeing the globalization of information. And that is eroding two basic blocks that existed throughout the history was language, physical reach, and the cultural sort of understanding. And the globalization sort of allows to reach across these elements. And the last one, in a way intertwined was the first two, in my view, is of course the fact that we now more and more interact in the virtual environment. And that has changed the way we can access information. It has changed the way we can analyze what is being talked about. And it can change also the way you can construct alternative realities. So it has allowed for multiple new dimensions to come into the picture with different parties playing different elements. And of course, there are downsides, is that there is no such thing as, let's say, 20 years ago, many political elites were expecting to have some sort of control over the way the information is disseminating. That is not possible anymore. But then on the other side, what this new environment and the technology allows for is, first time in human history, you can quantify and see every single digital conversation that takes place. And that's also a new added dimension to ability to understand, affect, influence, and see the behavioral change. So these are, in my view, some of the basic parameters that have changed, but I'm sure that we can go deeper on any of those later on during the main course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Portman?
Yeah, to build on that, I think that one thing that has changed is that this kind of information has become more sophisticated and more attractive. So whereas in the past, some of the goals of propaganda were to make people not listen to stuff, now there's a ready audience to be almost entertained by things which may be highly subjective, may not actually be truthful, but they're ready to receive it all the same. I think the second thing has changed is that we are now living in a concept of continuous information war. It doesn't necessarily have to be linked to a conflict. It carries on before any such conflict. And the third is that we're more ready to talk about it. I think, a year, 18 months ago, this was still kind of a taboo subject, in diplomacy anyway. And now there's much more of a readiness to speak frankly about the challenge of information war.
Okay, thank you.
So for me, I believe novelty is in the way how media is evolves, because everything is evolving through the time. So here, media, everyone become a media. Each tweet is a part of the media, and thus way how you influence the media and how media at the end is influencing people around it is the way how these warfare and the aspects of propaganda works nowadays. So indeed the actuality of the continuous informational pressure upon the listener. So as much as possible, you are repeating and repeating through different sources the same information until it is accepted as a certain truth or something like that.
Okay, thank you. That was a quick start. So let's go to our main course, and here, in panel, we have experts from NATO side. Mr. Schatz, I perceive you as from a NATO side, and from EU, and from private sector. That looking from the NATO perspective, also in NATO operation in Afghanistan, there was quite a lot of mention the concept of winning hearts and minds of local residents, and the role of this in the future nation building of Afghanistan. Now we have come to quite a lot of new conflicts in near borders of NATO. In of course east we have east of Ukraine, but I would like you to focus more on south of what is happening south and what is related to Daesh. Your center has done quite a lot of research on how Daesh is operating and how it's using information in order to attract new recruits, in order to change the perception about the organization as such. They want to perceive as a state, and how you see what are the mechanisms that they use, and what are the implications of these mechanisms also on alliance and on Western societies.
Well, first, just for the record, I don't speak in the name of NATO. I just speak in the name of Center of Excellence. So I'm a bit more free sometimes. Well, first, it is being a learning curve. Adaptation to the new information environment has been a learning curve. It has been a learning curve for the nations, and it has been a learning curve for through Afghanistan, also for NATO. We recently produced a rather extensive sort of lessons identified, hopefully learned sort of research, and sort of earmarked the problem sets. And the problem sets are quite simple. There's no rocket science there. But basically the key things is, A, you have to be aware that whatever your military action, it is going to resonate with an audience. B, you can't delineate. If you do something in Afghanistan, you can't assume it will not be bouncing back to your own home audience. It's global. Second. Third, it's a simple thing. What you say is what you have to do, and what you do is what you have to say. That's, very simple truths, but very hard, especially within big hierarchies, a lot of stakeholders talking to different audiences, getting into the mood of, I'll rather say something that audience would like, and then somewhere else I'll do a slightly different thing. Doesn't work, especially if the environment is low. And the fourth very important element is be aware that everything communicates. There's no such thing. It's not like when I sit here on a stage and I start communicating and then the communication starts. Everything communicates. What has been done, where the missile has been shot, where the troops have been moving, everything gives a communicative message. And in a comprehensive approach, deeds are far more important elements of communication. So, to quote Admiral Millen, we should not be that concerned of what we communicate, rather thinking what our actions communicate. And that's the mindset that we have to have. And I think that is where NATO is learning its lessons. It's not easy. There are new processes being put in place within NATO to make sure that these 28 independent actors are speaking along the same lines, in the same direction. On Daesh, well, we found it very interesting because I think, in a nutshell, Daesh is a medieval concept wrapped in a 21st century information context. and wrapped in a very, very, I wouldn't want to use that, but rather elegantly. Because when you think about the way they communicate, they're using all the modern tools of communication. They have an acute awareness of the audiences. This year, we are about to publish a new study and research we've done on the way they recruit youngsters in Europe. And just looking at the way for instance, I think I would ask you, I would probably not quite the target audience of Daesh, but what is your perception? You would probably remember these things about beheadings, burned people in cages, sex slaves, and all that. But then, I would have here an audience they would consider their potential target audience, about 70% of these people would have a different perception. Why? Because they have quite a different way of communicating with this audience that resonates with their anxiousness. The anxiousness of adolescent population, of social groups that are sensing themselves outside of being included in the social processes. And when we dissect the way they communicate, very well resonates. You'll be part of a group. We bring justice. We are fair. We bring social equality. We are part of history making. All of these elements that very well and of course, if they do that specifically in the areas where these audiences exist, that is social media, online environment, and if they understand the concept of information bubble, that is, we live in an information bubble, in the paradox of existing in this multiplicity of information, but ending up in a bubble. That's where we are, and they are trying to create their own bubbles around these groups that they target. So, very sophisticated, acute awareness of the information environment, but the basic message is, well, I would say, a medieval one, fulfilling the prophecy of soldiers of Medina, it was, or Mecca, I don't remember, fighting the final battle with crusaders and spreading the Islam all over the world. Well, quite not a modern concept. But still, if you apply the means of the modern communication, if you apply the ability to reach out, and very interesting, when you look at some of the attacks, not probably the highest profile attacks, but many of the attacks have been taken by the lone actor. Normally the terrorism has worked in a sense of cells, groups of people interacting. This is a new pattern. Why? Because they reach out through internet. They don't require physical presence to make people change their behavior and go do something. And that's another trend that is interesting to observe. And the last one that I'll raise here is their adaptability. Because of course, well, yes, they're using Twitter, they're using YouTube, they're using Snapchat, well, basically all the Western platforms as their key tools for reaching out, recruiting. One would ask, well, still there. And when we did our research, also the one that we've published last year, we saw, yes, they are taking down these accounts. But they very quickly adapted. They created a network-based approach, and that is where you can't say there's a single leader. They create a whole network through 300,000 plus tweet accounts that rely on to disseminate that information. So, a simple taking out a considered leader account, 3 or 4 methodologies evolved in a time frame of 3 months that we observed that, just to counter it, and counter it very effectively. So there, we speak about crowdsourcing in a positive way, but they're doing the same kind of approach. So this is, I think, interesting, but, not to say that they're such smart people. They have a basic vulnerability. And their basic vulnerability, utopia they paint does not exist. So this can go to certain lengths, And that's one of the big vulnerabilities to all these utopian stories based on propaganda that doesn't exist in real life. So in a way to bridge back what can be done, one of the key recipes to destructing these kind of approaches is show the reality. Show the reality. Make people experience the reality. I think that's one of the strongest ways around it. Of course, there are many nuances to it, but I think we will win.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Mr. Portman, you headed task force focuses on different region on eastern neighborhood of European Union. So there's a other actor there, not Daesh. Maybe there's also some activities of Daesh, but more in near eastern neighborhood of EU. We see the one of most active actors in information space is Russia, and you have been focusing on how pro-Kremlin information campaigns take place. And what is your take on this? What is their instrument, their approaches, their tactics, what they want to achieve with this? And what is also approach of EU to counter these measures or to limit the negative impact of these?
Right. Well, first of all, let's be absolutely clear that there is a gulf of difference between when we talk about Daesh and when we talk about Russia. With Daesh, we're talking about a medieval, perverted cult which claims to have a statehood but doesn't. Of course, in Russia, we're talking about something completely different, a sovereign country. But if you look at the EU relationship with Russia, it's come a long way in the last couple of years in the wrong direction. You know, we used to have a relationship with Russia which gave very privileged status. We had a strategic partnership with Russia. We had summits twice a year. We had an openness to engagement with Russia that put it absolutely top of the list of priority countries for the European Union. Now that is suspended because of what's happening in Ukraine, and instead we have a team, which I lead, which has been tasked by the European Council, the highest decision-making body in the EU, with addressing the threat of Russian disinformation. So unfortunately, we're in a much less satisfactory position than we were. So my team, just to give you the background, was set up on the mandate of the European Council last year, which specifically asked the High Representative, Mrs. Mogherini, to set up a special task force in the EU to address the problem of Russian disinformation. So we have a mandate from all 28 member states of the EU at the highest level. We actually do three things, because we felt right at the start that chasing someone else's disinformation and trying to only rebut disinformation doesn't solve the problem. We have to do that, but we also have to do two other things. We have to improve the EU's own communication. We have to explain better why the EU is spending 12 million euros in Ukraine, why we have 250 projects there, why we have the Eastern Partnership, why we care about what's happening in Georgia, Moldova, and other countries in our neighborhood. And we have to do also more to support a more pluralistic media environment in this region, especially in the Russian language media space. So we can't communicate only on our own. We need more partners to succeed. But in terms of that information or disinformation challenge that's facing us, we've spent the last year analyzing the flow of disinformation. So we have a network of contributors across the European continent who write into us every week and tell us when they have seen examples of propaganda, of false stories in their media. And what we try to do centrally in Brussels is put all those pieces of the jigsaw together and share that information with as wide an audience as possible, and also provide the factual corrections to that disinformation. Now, in terms of what we've seen after a year of doing this, first of all, in terms of where this is coming from, I don't think we have to be reticent to say that information war, as Russia calls it, is a part of the toolkit now. That is very clearly on the record from the Russian government. it is a part of Russian military doctrine that information confrontation, destabilizing propaganda, use of false data are parts of the toolkit. So that is on the record and open and accepted. And in terms of the tools to convey that disinformation, we see a huge network of international media, domestic media, both mainstream and fringe, extremist websites, NGOs, many here in the Baltic states, think tanks, and of course trolling as well. A relatively recent phenomenon, but we know a lot more about trolling than we used to a couple of years ago. What we see is a extremely wide range of disinformation. It can be historical revisionism, it can be conspiracy theories, threats, fakes, lies, offensive material, humorous material. But it boils down to two particular themes, and I'd say one particular target country, which come through very, very clearly over a year of us analyzing this. And just to say, we in the team, just ourselves, have found over 2,000 examples of disinformation in our work in 18 languages. We don't claim that is anywhere near the picture. That's just a little taster, scratching the surface of the full volume of disinformation. But it gives us a good feel for the range of disinformation and also the number of languages it's carried in. The first overwhelming theme is to give a negative commentary on the West. First of all, to portray NATO, the US, the West as aggressive, and secondly, to portray the EU in particular as disintegrating, weak, hypocritical, immoral. The second theme, the flip side of that, is to portray Russia in a good light. In terms of conflict situations, we've seen that in particular in Syria, where there's been an enormous amount of disinformation. And the country, of course, that has been targeted most of all over the past year is Ukraine, where we have seen a bombarding narrative portraying Ukrainians as fascists, as committing genocide, as aggressors, as Ukraine as not a real country, Ukrainian as not a real language, and the actions of Russia, by comparison, legal and supported by the wider international community. What's the purpose of this, you asked? First of all, it is to distract attention from certain policies. Secondly, to distort the reality of those actions. Thirdly, to reach a ready audience of people in Europe who are ready to believe disinformation. There is an incredibly broad stratum of society who are disengaged from politics, who don't trust politicians, who don't trust the bureaucrats who work for them, and who are ready to listen to alternative voices and be entertained and be ready to engage with conspiracy theories and alternative narratives. And ultimately the goal is to slow down decision making and make consensus harder to reach so that politics works more slowly and less effectively than it could do otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Now we turn to our third speaker, Mr. Hilchuk, and here I will try to draw on your experience in private sector and both information campaigns of Daesh and also what is Russia doing, and I guess also others are focusing partly their activities on society, and they want to access the society, they want to access specific individuals, and of course they, in some instances, they want to also target specific like decision makers. So in your experiences, what are the, let's say, main also tools, what are used also in private sector to do this, and what can we, what do you see from your perspective, what are the reactions of individuals, and what to do in order to limit the negative impact of these type of actions?
So we, on private sector, we are more information consumers. We're not kind of policymakers were more consume and then pass forward all information we receive. And for me, on daily basis, I'm leading a team teaching computers to understand our world as we humans do, so with the help of AI algorithms and neural networks and so on and so forth, these boring technical things. But while teaching computers, it helped to understand what information is around us and how we humans process the information. It is no doubt that the environment around us, and not only environment around us, actually the information, they shapes us as a personalities, so through the course of time, and we are sort of predisposed and sometimes prejudiced or even biased towards the information we consume and then pass forward. So here, any things like rational at the first point, like and irrational at the end, like confirmational bias or bandwagon biases we have, they all create who we are, and we can't escape it because our brain work like this. And here, from the perspective of private sector, we are in a bit concerned if everybody is consuming the information. So information is impacted everybody and everyone. So everyone who is impacted by information, and he then at the end is reacting and acting in accordance with this new experience he is gaining. So for example, let's imagine some sort of news producer. He has his own experience, his own childhood, and now he is, so to say, is the person who is in a TV channel, and he decides what topics will be covered, what tonality will be put in there, which people will be hired, and how journalists will be trained, for example. So he consciously or unconsciously, usually, will kind of distort the information this channel is pushing forward and putting forward. And here the main thing, of course, is what if the information is purposely crafted, and what is the propaganda main weapon if not the information specifically created to gain a certain point of view in listeners. And if we perceive everyone as a consumer, so if some biased person is an intelligence analyst or some open source intelligence analyst, so how we see the spread across Europe, somebody is reporting what they saw, so they are monitoring the media, and based on who is publishing what, they are reporting these things, and people are creating the reports, and this information is used for some policies. But can it happen that the biases of these people are pushing for the certain tonality in these reports? What wording is used by these people in these reports? So it really is in how at the end it is impacting the end policy is if everybody is pushing for a certain tonality. And what if this person has its own agenda, making kind of based on his own beliefs some stuff in the reports? And basically everybody is under influence, and it doesn't need to be North Korea to be under the kind of information attack. So we are exposed to this everywhere in the world. So everyone is consuming, everyone is producing the information, and we don't know the agendas of these information producers. And what we need to do is to try to avoid this subjective input as much as possible. Not in order to, feel safe as a society, but as well kind of be aware that the public sector, the government is doing everything right, and has right tools in order to deal with the media and with the threats that media can produce. Here, so of course, there is a kind of tendency saying that internet is becoming everything, but only 45% of world population has access to the internet, and this is less than a half. And actually, as kind of researchers found out that 2/3 of these 45% are living in the countries which has internet censorship and surveillance programs in place. So what kind of information these people are consuming? So is it the internet, or it is the kind of state-sponsored media? And most likely it says the TV and radio and or any other kind of audio-visual content streaming. And these are really notorious difficult sources of data to be monitored and to be processed. So if we imagine some team is analyzing this TV content, for example, they are kind of just watching it. And while doing that, they are, of course, taking notes, kind of transcribing the announcement, counting people appearances or public figure appearances there. And they really just looking, observing, and recording. They don't have a time to analyze it. And this is really manual work. And actually, TV is very influential as a media when it is kind of main source of information. Or even if you are working only with the media, TV media as such, at the end, as influential media, it will kind of put you in a risk position, saying that you are as well somehow will be biased or influenced. And if you being analyst is being under influence, then it will impact the quality of your work. And what we come up with within our studies, within our work in private sector, is that we are creating solutions, and we are thinking that how to eliminate and reduce this kind of human error, human biased error while analyzing the information. And it is clear that human mind cannot keep up with all information around us. So I'm thinking of some solutions which can process enormous amounts. Should not be any kind of limitation of amounts of information these solutions can kind of process. There should not be any status quo negativity biases for these solutions. And there is no any religious or political affiliations in technology. So, and we reached the level of technology development which can understand the spoken text, transcribe the written text of news and TV shows, find out images and scenes which are used to promote specific point of view, find out people who were expressing what point of view, what was their demographics, and what is their attitude towards the topic, what audiovisual effects were used. And with all that, we can say now who, in the reports, after the kind of very deep semantic analysis, when all this information is combined, that we do know who said what at the end and how he said it, where information was originated from. And these reports at the end, which are created by solutions, they are not static. They are updated each time when any new broadcast about relevant topic appears. And yeah, these solutions are reality. I'm not talking only about big data mining system, which has these abilities to kind of collect data from social media or bank statements or loyalty cards we have. I'm talking about the media data mining systems. And what is true is that the TV is really hard type of content to be analyzed. So we in our studies, what we come up with is the system which watches TV 24/7 and understands what it sees there. And what we believe in, that these artificial intelligence-based solutions are the future of the monitoring, our future of the analysis of the media, and I believe that these are the really helping hands to the policymakers and the analysts, because these data collectors, they lacking the human error in them, they are lacking the biases. And indeed, it is a reality. I can say, and we have a computer in the office, really sitting and watching TV 24/7. He understands what it says. We are calling him Mark, and yeah, so there is a little fun in that. But indeed, he's just warming up, and we are making him tick, and we believe that there is a great future in him.
Okay, thank you. Before we turn to the questions, I will give opportunity to speakers. Maybe you have reactions to what others said, or something to add to this. Or
Well, I just quickly would say that, yes, of course, technology not only changes the information landscape, but also we're getting the new tools to understand that landscape. And I think when I look at a larger scene, that in fact West in generic sense has two basic advantages: technological superiority and know-how superiority. Probably we would not find that much in the governments. I think there's always room for improvement there. But then when you think of the marketing powerhouses, then they're basically West. So to me, also in our line of effort, one of the key elements is actually to make sure that these two advantages are being translated into the government and national capability to perform in these more information confrontation circumstances. And I think the methods like just described are there, that we can quickly get into better understanding, collecting huge amounts of data, and then have a much more more fine-tuned response to the challenges, rather than basing that on the empirical views, or as always is being said, well, hunch, where we respond to a particular situation. I think that is something that certainly we in our Center of Excellence very much trying to drive towards, basing more and more of the conclusions on data. Data and ability not only to collect and interpret the data, and the technology is the king.
mm-hmm. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think we're only just beginning to understand the role that big data can play in helping us not only with our own communications, but recognize others' communications. There's some really interesting work being done at the moment to show how different countries' media's different emphasis on certain political leaders can give a completely different opinion from one country to another about the views of that country on a particular subject. I think that is absolutely something that has to be factored much more into EU communications than has been before.
Yeah, and just adding some small thing, that in order to determine what is a country's specific political agenda and direction they're trying, it is not only the kind of social media which is easy to be analyzed. So what we witnessed with the kind of recent developments, that not only talk shows or news, but even humor shows, or jokes in the humor shows are those who are defining which is direction for the particular country, kind of idea of manipulating the public. And what I mentioned, these are the sources we need to start to analyze in a larger scale, starting to analyze the larger scale, so of TV media, for example, in the whole countries at once, and seeing what is the reaction in which media towards a certain topic. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And now we go to dessert. 2 questions, answers. Is there a mic somewhere? Yeah. So we will start in the front. Here we will take 2 or 3 questions from this side and then go to the left side. Go ahead.
Thank you. Is this on? Hello. Hi. My name is Nina Yankovic. I'm from the States, but I'm currently living in Kiev, Ukraine, where I'm a Fulbright Clinton Public Policy Fellow advising the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on strategic communications. So we're very much in the same trenches, and I commend what you're doing. I've been observing this space for a long time before I came to Ukraine, and especially since Russian aggression started, I've been both heartened and a little bit worried to see the amount of different projects all scattered across Europe and the States even, to counter disinformation. And I'm wondering, and this is a particular research interest of mine as well, how do you view the coordination between, for instance, your centers, and what recommendations would you have for EU and NATO policymakers as they are looking to increase that cooperation in the future? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then in the second row.
Thank you. My name is John. I'm from China, but now I'm living in UK for a master. Thank you for your speech. But I have one question. Is about you have talked about the steward of the information. I think you're mainly focused on the individual or social media, but actually I think there is another majority who destroy the information. That is the media industry. Let's take, for instance, more than 60% of the information is controlled by the Times in the UK. So, and the Brexit leaders have a very strong journalist background. So at this point, you also mentioned the censorship. That is also a different part. So I'd like to know: is there any what's the strategy for you to cope with the censorship, cope with the distort of information by the social media, and the distort of information by the media industry, those companies? So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And in the third row. Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, no. Okay.
Hello, my name is Christian. I'm from Romania, but I'm living in Russia. In the last 5 years, I lived there, so I see the propaganda and all the ideas. And it seems to me that your view on information is totally different than Russians' view on information, because they think that information should be controlled, and they are trying to control. And also, as their foreign ministry spokesman said, should be fast, and the first who picks the ball shoots all the points. So they have a total different view. And I want to ask you, what are the concrete actions and the measures that can be taken to react faster? Because the Russians, I realize they react faster. They don't put so much emphasis on the truth, and they don't need coordination. And also, how can you react faster if there are 28 different NATO states, or they have different strategies of communication, and until they decide what is the message, how can you improve this decision and to react faster? And also, if you know the Russian audience, because they know the audience in Europe, but what are your actions to know the Russian audience, and at what communication strategy should you deploy to the Russian people? And also, there is another question that is important, and I think you said that our strategy is to show the reality is the best strategy, but what do you do when you cannot show the reality, when you have information like reports from agencies that they cannot be shown, the sources cannot be shown? And in Russia, it's very, they react like, okay, show us the proof, show us the information, but the intelligence agencies cannot show the information. What do you do when you cannot show the information? So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will start the next round of questions with your question. But now, let's turn to our speakers. So we have several questions about coordination, about recommendations to policymakers. So I guess it's more for Center Excellence and also from STATCOM Task Force.
First on this notion, we react. NATO has a lot of military thinking in it, and the military thinking says you don't win by reacting. You have to have your own initiative. And I think here I would say that one of the key recommendations from me, if I'm asked, and when I asked, is that don't always think what the other party is saying. Don't follow through everything they are putting out as a lie, and etc., etc. Because then you fight your fight in a turf predefined by them. And by definition, very, very difficult to win, if at all possible. So I would rather say, decide where and how you make your own initiative. Your initiative cannot be the same as theirs, because by the nature of the construct of the democratic countries, you are accountable for what you say, and you are accountable when you say untruths. So you have to base it on a different set of values and different set of requirements than they do, but still being actively pursuing your narrative, seeking out to achieve your effect, I think is rather the answer than keeping only responding to that. I don't say that you don't respond, but be careful on measuring how much of resource that currently we're certainly devoting far less to that than, for instance, Russia does, to response, and how much you devote to the active part of your narrative, pursuing your narrative. Coordination, well, there's one thing about coordination. When you evoke word coordination, that you can always say there's always room for improvement. Because of course there are many actors in NATO, many stakeholders, national headquarters, etc. In EU, many stakeholders. And in between the two, etc. That is one of the complexities. Then one also has to, I think, derive not only that's a complexity. The strong feature is all these actors play based on the same value set. And that's where I think most of the strength comes from. On Russian comment and Russian audience, of course there are players that have better knowledge of Russian audience than others. And I think certainly the Baltic region are those that have quite a good understanding of the Russian audience. Neither NATO nor, as far as I know, EU have taken a decision that we have an active policy in that audience. Individual nations might have. But I think once again, you're right, the information environment has been very much controlled. And that control, I think, comes from and that's my interpretation, understanding the vulnerability of the realities. Because there are many things that they can show great about Russia, but then, and again, when there's a choice for people, including their own family, they vote with their feet for living in other circumstances. And I think at the core thing, that's the basic difference. Can we use the same methods as they do to expose that? No. And also on the timing question, you would never beat somebody who has no restrictions to produce whatever he wants fits his narrative. Lie, fake story, conspiracy theory. We can't win it. So I would rather say, I would not respond on timing-wise. Let them do their thing on timing, and produce whatever fits their narrative. I would rather, once again, concentrate what is our talk, because the longer term effect of their strategy is loss of credibility. And if I view the modern information environment, the biggest asset you can have is a credibility. Scarce resource, even also for the Western governments, increasingly scarce. But I think the Russian method, especially for the outside audience, doesn't allow the credibility. And therefore I would take the tactical difficulty, but I would work for strategic benefit.
Mr. Portman?
On the coordination point, you're absolutely right. We have to do much, much better. But if I compare where we are now to 18 months ago, actually, certainly in terms of the EU, people weren't addressing the issue at all. So I'd much rather lots of people were addressing it in an uncoordinated way than no one was addressing it. But I think that we're addressing that in the EU simply by having this team which brings in experts from the member states. 7 of my team are provided by the member states. So we're providing a platform for the EU collectively to look at this issue. And we are working increasingly closely with NATO and with other allies, Canada, the US. On this issue of the speed of reaction, I mean, the classic example this year, which many of you may know of, was the Lisa case in Germany, where there was this incredibly emotive story of a German girl of Russian origin who had supposedly been abducted and raped by migrants in Germany. And it brought 12,000 people protesting onto the streets of Germany. And it was a made-up story. And the problem was that, of course, the German authorities had to spend a couple of days finding out if it was true before they could categorically say it wasn't. So they gave the information space to the fake story. I don't see a way around that. If you have to deal in truth, you have to check your facts before you respond. The only thing you can do is build up the immunity so people are more likely to recognize it before it comes. So next time something like that happens in Germany, I think it's become such a widespread and known case, more people will recognize it or at least be ready to question the story and listen to the reaction from the authorities before they make their minds up. In terms of reaching out to a Russian audience, you know, we have to do that much more. It's hard because the Russian media space is small and shrinking. But what we are trying to do is speak much more in Russian from Brussels than we ever did. You know, Russian is not an official language of the EU, so we never really communicated in Russian. We're trying to change that because there are millions of people in the EU, let alone in the wider region, who receive their news and information in Russian. So we now have a Russian language website. We have a network of Russian journalists. We're trying to build up a relationship of trust with Russian journalists across the spectrum and say, if you want news about the EU, in real time, in Russian, and from a trusted source, we can help you get that information. And we're finding that journalists across the spectrum in Russia are responding to that. And finally, on how do you use information that is classified, it's not really a problem for us. We deal entirely in open source. So everything that we put out there is open source information. And some of the best disproofs of the year have come from open source. You don't need intelligence services. Probably the 2 most common themes of disinformation of the year. 1, no Russian troops in Ukraine. This has been disproved by Russian soldiers themselves, posting messages back to friends and family on social media. It's been disproved by President Putin, twice saying, oh, actually there were. So you don't need intelligence services. And the other big theme, the theme that Russia's intervention in Syria has been more effective than the West, that it has targeted solely ISIS, that it has not killed any civilians. There is some amazing work out there simply by using Google Maps to sort of show evidence produced by the Russian Defense Ministry and show that it's not what they claim it to be, that it's an attack in an entirely different part of Syria from where ISIS are. So we can do so much without having to rely on classified information. Yeah, MH17, yeah.
From kind of private sector perspective, it is clear that there are certain researches which can say what makes people being vulnerable to propaganda. Usually it is some sort of knowing language, speaking local language, not speaking local language, or feeling alienated from some sort of ethnical background, or somehow being part of certain community. And sometimes it is just lack of kind of cultural or cultural education as such. So what is the main thing here is to reach for the people, trying to educate them. This is the one thing. And what to educate them about, then the research of the media environment and how the media is trying to influence. That's the way to be analyzed and data to be collected about. And this answers that concern over media companies and big media companies who has a certain kind of market share. So this is here for what we need. We don't need to censorship them. We need just to know what they are talking about. And this is how we need to build our kind of counter reaction to that.
Yeah, and there was this question also about what was also Stanislav started answering, and about large media, the role of media as such, and especially of the large companies, and they're not only let's say that they are providing information, but also their responsibility to provide truthful information. So anybody can answer to this.
Well, I think many people, especially if you recognize the Russian narrative saying, well, the West media are the same like ours, as an objective, telling all the time the lies all the time. I think the key here is to recognize, of course, also Western media have their political opinion biases. But in any given Western media space, you can choose and compare. And that is your free choice. That is your free choice. In the cases either Russia or Daesh, there's no choice. There's no choice. There's only one narrative, and all other ones that are trying to pursue a different one are driven down. In some cases, like in Daesh territories, just killed. In some places, taken off the market. So it's about, of course, people have opinions, but also on another note, I would say the systems within which journalists function, the ethical legal systems, are much more sound. So you can sue the journalist and expect a free trial if he's put a lie to you in Latvia or in the United States. You have mechanisms even for individual. Try that in Russia.
Okay. So let's turn to our second round of questions. Let's start here. Mr. Mike. Here in the third row.
Hello. My name is Jakub Tomaszek, coming from the Czech Republic, working at a think tank, Prague Security Studies Institute. Last weekend there was a conference in Prague called on strategic communication, and one panel addressed the issue of methodology. I'd like to ask Mr. Portman, in your work, what's your approach to methodology? How do you define disinformation cases, and how do you distinguish it from, let's say, voices of people that are just frustrated with the West? And my second question is, within your center, what are the plans for the next couple of months? Whether it's in terms of funding, employ more people, whether you have new plans. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go there in the first row. Yep.
Thank you, Mars. My name is Artyoms Uršulskis, Riga, Latvia, and I represent the European Affairs Commission of our parliament. And I would like to raise one issue which you didn't spoke yet on this panel, and my comment and question after comment will well, basically go directly to Mr. Portman and to a certain extent to Mr. Sarts as well. We here in Latvia and our friends in Vilnius, in Tallinn, in Helsinki, in Stockholm, in Warsaw, and in many other places certainly understand that in current situation, Russia is the main threat for us, for our security, for our people. But when I'm trying to be a little bit more empathic and imagine myself as a decision maker in Moscow, imagine myself as a Russian guy in Moscow, what is clear for me right now that for Russia, NATO is not the biggest threat, and Europe is not the biggest threat. Even the US is not the biggest threat. Right now, probably it is China. And there are even some regions in China where in geographic books, Siberia or parts of Siberia are named as temporarily Russian territory. And this is the issue which is actually quite widely right now spoken inside the democratic opposition of Russia, inside the immigrants which are currently residing in Europe or in United States. And well, my question is really simple. I think that, of course, when we are speaking about deterrence, forces are very important, but information and that kind of information which can reshape people's minds and reshape people's thinking is even more important. And this issue, the issue of Russia-China relations, is this important for us? Is this important for East Stratcom? Do we have a capability to speak about that? And do we have a capability and do we think that this is the thing we should change in minds of people in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, in Kazan, Vladivostok, and et cetera, et cetera? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, and there in the third row.
Yes, hello, Gry Falkenström from Danish Institute for International Studies. My question would be to primarily you, Giles Portman. Normally when we talk about the development of Stratcom, the focus is a lot on Russia and the need to reach certain target groups and to prevent some development in perceptions. But what about the internal potential of developing Stratcom within the EU? Can you elaborate a bit on that? Are there actually some advantages internally by promoting the practice of Stratcom among your member states and in EU?
Okay, thank you. So I guess majority of the questions go to Mr. Portman, but also afterwards the question about methodology I would address to Mr. Hilchuk. How do you perceive? What is your methodology? So,
okay, to our Czech colleague, I was in Prague at the event last week. How do we define information war, propaganda, Stratcom? We try and keep it really simple and talk not about information war. We don't accept that we are in an information war. We simply talk about, to be really blunt, truth and lies. So when we see information that is factually incorrect, then we try to correct it with facts that there can be no discussion about. So MH17 was mentioned. When RT, for example, carries a headline saying the Joint Investigative Team has produced its report on MH17 and says that Russia was not involved. That is factually 180 degrees from what the team said in its report. So we simply point out the truth. In terms of future plans, this is a very moot point because yesterday or the day before yesterday, the European Parliament proposed that we are given extra staffing and a budget. That now has to go to the member states and the Commission to see whether they agree. We've already expanded since we started. Our workload is going up and our staffing is going up, but it could go up quite significantly next year if those plans are agreed. In terms of the Russia-China issue, we don't get involved in that, but I completely agree that the point we try to make is that the EU and NATO, for that matter, are not a threat. There is this strong narrative that the West is encircling Russia, that it is preparing for war with Russia, that it is trying to humiliate Russia. that its sanctions are deliberately imposed to try and destroy Russia. We have to be clear that until the situation in Ukraine 2 years ago, the EU, and for that matter NATO, as I said earlier, were trying to reach out and offer Russia the kind of privileged relationship that we were offering no other country. And the only reason that changed was because of what happened in Ukraine. And certainly from my point of view as someone dealing with the disinformation threat, the real problem I see long term is that this is damaging trust in such a way that if we find a solution to the problems of Ukraine, we're still going to have so much difficulty getting back to a productive relationship with Russia because of the damage that's been done in the information space. In terms of Stratcom in member states, I'm not sure I completely understood the question, but certainly in terms of getting the member states to support a more effective communication externally, which is basically what we do, I think there are two ways that we're doing that. First of all, as I say, is providing a platform for the member states, and they provide us with the majority of our staffing. Secondly, I think we have to show where's the limits of what we can do. And certainly when it comes to the challenge of disinformation in the member states, even though we're the External Action Service, we look at that a lot and we monitor it a lot. But when it comes to the real granularity and detail of that, when people read our disinformation report and say, oh, I understand there's this extremist website in Hungary. Can you tell us more about that? We want to do a report on that. Who's behind it? Where can I find them? We simply don't have that level of detail. And that's where the member states need to take the responsibility as well. And the example of the Czech Republic, which last week announced that it is setting up a new unit, and that this is an initiative of the Interior Minister, to take that challenge seriously in a member state is something that I think is really important for other member states to take note of.
Okay, thank you. So about methodology, how Mark defines what is lies and what is, say, just misinformation?
So, answering directly to that question is Mark does not decide what are lies, what are not lies. What he can do, he can find the weight points of a certain messages. So what was tonality? Was it positive? Was it negative? And find out who else was responding, what our reaction was towards one or another, what chain of reaction it created. Because actually there is no point on adapting a certain methodology if you don't have a data. And since we have to analyze the kind of overall globally these threats, because if some red button is blinking in this country, some button is blinking in this country and there, so it might be that this is some sort of joint operation to kind of influence the opinion. And we should find these patterns in how this is coming together, maybe to some sort of snowball, because when it comes as a big one, we will be too late to react towards it. And here, analyzing is not only saying who said what. Okay, we are able to do that, but what we are gaining in data on as well is who saw what. And this is as well is a part of the data which is collected in the private sector. Mm-hmm. So who saw what reaction they have towards what they saw, how they reacted in social media, how they reacted in the comments. So as a result of a certain broadcast or a certain opinion pushed towards the people, how they reacted. And putting all this in a complete report, not only from the audio-visual aspect, where Mark obviously can help with, but as well all the social media analysis platforms which we have. So combining this all together with the media companies' data, for example, saying who was watching this or who switched it to another channel when say, some neighboring country political figure appeared and they don't like it, because they do know that he tells not always the truth, so they are switching it off. So there is no effect on the these media, targeted media addresses. So, yeah.
Okay. About Russia, China, something to add on that?
Well, I think we in the West are more into believing win-win. So saying that something else is a threat doesn't necessarily translate as such a policy. I would rather say on this, of course NATO and EU is not, or the West is not threat to Russia, but I would recognize that the values and the system we live in is a risk to head of Russia and the current elite. And that's why and how they see that. And of course, therefore, in a way, one can argue inevitability of the situation because of a divergent course of two parties, one going to establishing a specific authoritarian way of running the country and set of control mechanisms, West pursuing their values. And they are not, as I see it, they can't sort of coexist, at least over a longer period of time. So there is an element of conflict, but more to the leadership of a country who have designed a specific model that is not correlated. I would also, a small comment on how we define strategic communications and also hostile influence wider. I would interpret it's not only lies. Smoking Admiral Kuznetsov through the English Straits is part of that communication. And in a way, very interestingly, commanding all of our media attention to that point. So this we also factor in the way we perceive communication.
Okay, so let's collect our last set of questions. We'll start in the back. Gentleman in blue suit. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question concerning medias, and you started to talk about channels that are speaking in Russian, and I'm now addressing you about the Russian-speaking channels that are located in Russia, and that's very credible source, and I mean it's great that we have such objective channels like TV Rain, and it's amazing that they can still survive in this harsh elite ruling and in this harsh elite ruling government. And the question is, how can we support these kind of medias? So in order to make sure an objective information goes there in Russian, so that they have Russian people have more choice with medias. Thank you.
Okay, gentleman in the same row. Pass the mic there.
Hi, Rick Jacobus, Netherlands. In the beginning of this panel, we talked about you talked about Daesh and taking down Twitter accounts and these things. To reverse it, what is your opinion on using, for instance, blockchain technology to support opposition opinions in Russia, for instance? For the people in the hall who are not familiar with blockchain technology, basically you cannot remove this information. It's spread out. Decentralized is spread out onto many machines, many computers, and this information cannot be just erased or taken down, like shutting down a printing press of a newspaper. So I would like to hear maybe from all three sides, what is your view on using this kind of technology to support the opposition in Russia? Thank you.
Okay, pass the mic to your gentleman. No, near you.
Go for it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank from the Peace and Security Department of the African Union Commission. I'm a researcher. I have a simple question for an issue that has not been raised so far when it comes to information in modern conflicts. It's when information is related to the call to violence or call to violence in the sense of inciting to genocide. I think the word genocide was pronounced. But still, the Rome Statute, the Rome Convention, or has not defined clearly what, does not given a legal content to incitement to genocide yet, and especially also some international criminal jurisdictions. So is there any mechanisms at the level of the European Union or NATO to prevent the use of information in the context of inciting to violence? Or I've heard, what you intend to do in a specific context when it comes to provide information to, from propaganda or false information. What are you doing, or what will we do when it comes to incite to violence, or what mechanisms are in place now to prevent a genocidal scenario to happen? Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving here to the front a little bit.
Hello, I'm Kat from Latvia, and I would like to ask a question. Before you talked about the Russia's propaganda machine, the impact of it on the society. But what about the cases when the people with really close economic or political or even personal relations with influential people from Russia are amongst the decision makers from the parliament, from the governments, and how can we fight that? Because their actions mostly are not that straightforward. So yeah, what can we do about that?
Okay, thank you. And in the first row here. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you very much. Roger Sutton from Canada. My question is about rules of engagement, specifically deterrence. The last panel we spoke about was saying you have to match deterrence across the board. So I'm just sort of wondering, you have institutions like the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, which is fabulously successful in trolling America. They've convinced Swedish people that if there's a NATO status of forces agreement, that women will be raped. They've simulated a gas explosion in Indiana and made it go crazy. So I'm just wondering, and I don't mean to raise the escalation threshold at the end of the, but is there any merit in returning the favor to Russia or to anybody else by causing panic through mass media? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then in the first row.
Yeah.
There was a question? No.
There was.
Yeah, here. In the first row, in the first row.
And hello, it's the last one. My name is Mats Fritzberger, Danish Foreign Policy Society and Chatham House member. I specialize in public diplomacy, and in that context, I kind of see three challenges in the areas that we have been talking about so far. One, I see the challenge from the construction of echo chambers due to globalization and access to internet and so on, that pretty much in the last 10 to 20 years we all have kind of like entered in our own cultural communities, and how we kind of tap into them. And I think personally that at least that makes it a very vital role what the public broadcastings are doing in our in the allied countries to raise the journalistic standards. The second point that I think is valid and important to consider is that communication and response through communication is not necessarily enough. Sometimes we also need to think about other ways that we, through policy decision making, can react to what is happening, for example, from the Russian Federation. For instance, through economy. Like, how can we set more standards on like ethical standards or standards of human rights in how investments are being conducted or these media enterprises are being funded. And third and foremost, I would say that there is a problem of looking at Stratcom and PD as an add-on. As Mr. Satz rightfully says, like, it's not just about strategic communication, it's about like a coherent strategy that we need to apply across silos. So my question is, like Mr. Portman has touched upon this within the EU system. So my question is more specifically as Mr. Satz, to ask in your dialogue with the NATO, how large is their awareness concerning considering of Stratcom of less than an add-on, less than of thinking in silos? Thank you.
Thank you. So, gentlemen, quite a lot of questions. I guess, Ernst, let's start with you.
Oh, okay. Well, very interesting questions and quite a number of those. I'll start with the NATO awareness. I think it is. I feel good about it. Let's put it that way. There has been strong dynamics in accepting that strategic communication, but not necessarily strategic communication as a buzzword, but the approach of, at the core of your strategy, you have to understand the effects on the audience. I think that is increasing. Of course, I would interpret, from my perspective, NATO is in a process to translating that understanding into how to apply to the big military machinery. We're not yet there. There's some things to be done, but I think across the spectrum, and both military and civilians related to military, I think are quite good at adapting when they recognize. And I think that's where we are. Not adopted, but recognized. Echo chambers, of course, agree. Rules of engagement, and I would link two of your comments, is when I look, for instance, both Daesh and Russia, the cornerstone of their attack is against the value systems. So our response has to be within the frame of the values that we have. So one can give back a favor as long as within the value systems that we share. And sometimes the best way to respond is not actually in the same way, but by doing something different. But you have to understand how it would translate, like the deterrence. Deterrence is a conscious status. It's a cognitive sort of concept. To make sure that you deter, or for that matter reassure, you have to understand how what you do is going to affect the group that you're targeting. And therefore, you have to, and once again, actions are the strongest communicators. And when they say something on their TV, you probably do something. And you might choose not to engage in this tit for tat on the public, but rather do something that is recognized by the leadership. By the way, Russians do quite a lot of that also at a military level. They don't show off, because sometimes it would impede into their internal message, but they do something that would be meant as a signal. Genocide? Well, absolutely. Information plays a key role on enabling the atrocities, making people perceive things and behave in a particular way. We've so far have not been able to look into this particular problem. There have been other tasks that we've done, but I certainly see there are at least a number of ways, and that's at top of the head, that can be done. But of course, there's still a key elements which one would like to see, and that is whether there is a rule of law in a particular area where you can refer to back when you see the breaches of a particular way, and that there is ability to have a civil society a player into that sort of game, which I think are two extremely important prerequisites to having successful counter strategy. But certainly information environment is one of the key elements in that what you described. Helping opposition. I would be cautious in direct help, because I think somebody traces there's some direct help to the opposition channels, that would be a good excuse to close them down. So I would rather morally support them rather than otherwise. And I would look at the ways how our state and other media can do things that would be translating to the Russian audience. I don't believe that there is a way that we can, Russia says one thing, you say the opposite thing, and Russian audience would listen. I don't think that's a way to go. You'd rather have to talk about absolutely different things. How good it is to live in I don't know, Amsterdam, or some other place, and put these kinds of things onto their into their cognitive space, into their information space. And I think that is more successful, of course, longer term, than banging with the opposite message, because the Kremlin has been able to, inoculate their audience against these kinds of our approaches.
Yeah, Mr. Bortman?
Yeah, just picking up from that, I agree with all of that. Reaching and supporting Russian media in Russia is the hardest thing to do. We can do a lot in terms of trying to improve media plurality, including in the Russian language, in the Eastern neighborhood, and indeed in member states as well. But reaching the audience in Russia is the hardest thing. 15 years ago, I think Russia was 60th in the World Press Freedom Index. It's now 148th. The media space is shrinking all the time. In terms of incitement to genocide, from our point of view, dealing with Russia, it's more about rejecting accusations of genocide. There's a constant accusation that the Ukrainians are guilty of genocide or want to commit genocide in the east of Ukraine. One of the most offensive and totemic examples of disinformation was the story carried on the main Russian state TV channel that a boy had been crucified by the Ukrainian army in the east of Ukraine. It was a fake, and the people in the video were acting. We have to be able to spread that kind of news and say that that's untrue. Leaders advocating Russia, this is a really sensitive area, especially when you see leaders perhaps from more extreme wings of the political spectrum supporting Russia. It's not something that we, as the East Stratcom Task Force, can get involved in as a sort of EU body. We're focused much more on communicating externally. I think it's primarily the responsibility for member states. And finally, on trolling, should we do a bit of trolling ourselves? I think not. We know a lot more about trolling than we did, thanks to people like Jessica Arrow. And I don't know how many of you know Jessica Arrow's story, but if you Google her name, A-R-O, you will find all you need to know. An amazing story about someone who investigated the troll factory in St. Petersburg and was subjected to, and is still subjected to, what can only be called as a form of psychological torture as a result, including, pretty horrific text messages in the middle of the night from her father, who's been dead 20 years. Some really horrible stuff. But the bravery of individual journalists is really important. The testimony of people who have worked in the troll factory. We're about to bring out a series of films interviewing people who used to work in the trolling factory and are now going to talk about how it works. And the other way to respond to trolling is through the courts. And right now in Finland and in Sweden, there are cases defending journalists and prosecuting people for trolling. And we have to use that route as well.
Okay.
Yeah. From private sector perspective, is that we live in a consumer-based economy. So if there is certain channel which kind of promotes a certain opinion, so what we need from our side is to create a content which is kind of can compete in quality and can appeal to consumers, and then that we will witness a shift towards the information source. This is the one hand. Another hand, what we are witnessing is the how to say, brands. So all around, everything is brand. So the threat to our Western way of living and our culture is as well a threat to our brand. So what Mr. Sard said is we need to promote the brand of the way how we live. We need to promote the good qualities, and maybe, I don't know, not directly explaining that, but seeing how these threats are done in order to be able to find the measures. Mm-hmm. And regarding the other things like the genocides, all these are more long-term policies to be done, because in one hand the current time who consume the information, these people are in a bit lost. They already created their opinion. So where these must be checked in is how youngsters are educated, what information we are putting through the families, what information we are putting through the schools, in order to who will we rise up. What is the next generation, how they will look upon these events, how we will, record this for the future, and will future kind of blame us, or they will thank us for doing our job well.
Okay, thank you. We will end here because we already have overspent our time, and we are keeping you from your lunch, so don't be angry. But to sum up, we are living in a time of in permanent confrontation of information, and you already have heard there are institutions that are working quite a lot of these issues, but adaptability and understanding your opposition side and understanding your audiences remains one of the most important things. So if you have some additional questions, then you can try to catch these gentlemen in the break and ask them questions personally. But now, before lunch, please join me in thanking them for their statements. Thank you.